The Society for Culture and Environment extends a warm welcome. You are watching a session on the London Jungle Book from the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, January 2019. We have with us Mr. John Bowles. Bowles is based in Radford, Virginia, and has guest curated exhibitions at Virginia Tech and Radford University Art Museum. He specializes in curating and producing touring international exhibitions focusing on contemporary indigenous artists. He will be in conversation with Mr. Bhajju Shyam. Bhajju is a celebrated Gond artist and the author of the book in discussion today, The London Jungle Book. He is a recipient of the Padma Shri for Art in 2018. We also have with us Mr. Anubhav Nath, Director of Ojas Art, and co-founder of the Ramchandar Nath Foundation, which is dedicated to restoring and promoting the arts and providing unique platforms to artists. Ms. Geeta Wolf, the founder of Tara Book, is considered one of the most original and creative voices in contemporary Indian publishing, is the publisher of the London Jungle Book. Ms. Tara Douglas is the founding member of the Adivasi Arts Trust, an organization that promotes awareness of Indian tribal culture and works with the tribes, involving them in digital media projects to make their arts more widely accessible.
Certain people have worked diligently behind the scenes to advance recognition and patronage of these indigenous artists like Bhajju and the rich cultures they represent. And three of them are here with us today. To me, each of them is a very much under-recognized hero. Geeta Wolf, who you see seated directly to my left, is the longtime head of the Chennai-based Tara Books, one of the world's leading publishers of elegantly illustrated, award-winning children's literature, including the London Jungle Book, The Nightlife of Trees, and many other publications written and or illustrated by Bhopal-based Gond artists and other indigenous artists from elsewhere in India. Dr. Tara Douglas, the center, heads the London-based Adivasi Art Trust and is involved with many other organizations in India and is responsible for producing extraordinary indigenous style animated films depicting Indian tribal myths and legends. In one project, she assembled an impromptu team of Bhopal-based Gond artists to create India's first animated film with cells entirely painted by tribal artists themselves. Anubhav Nath is the founder and director of Ojas Gallery, which has been at the forefront of recognizing and promoting Bhajju and other indigenous artists throughout exhibitions in New Delhi, the Jaipur Literary Festival, and elsewhere, thus tirelessly promoting recognition of contemporary indigenous art as fine art on the par with any art. And that's very important. This institution itself, Bharat Bhavan, has been a pioneer of recognition of artists through Swaminathanji, the recognition and actual identification and discovery, if we can use that term, which is a complicated one, of tribal village artists in rural Madhya Pradesh. Any event, it will be totally impromptu what we're going to discuss, and I'd like to perhaps begin by asking Geeta what it was like to be part of this process of working with Bhajju. Bhajju too will need to explain his perspective on it. Much of this is written in the beautiful London Jungle Book, which is key to understanding the exhibition and is available in the gallery. So without further ado, why don't you tell us the story of how this book evolved?
Hello, nice to be here, nice to see all of you. To be very brief, I met Bhajju while we were working on this particular book, which is A Nightlife of Trees. As John has very kindly announced, we are a Chennai-based publishing house, 25 years old, and have been working with a lot of indigenous, tribal, and folk artists for all this time. And one of the things we do are workshops, inviting people down, finding out what the stories they want to tell, suggesting. Okay. So we're not a traditional publishing house in the sense that people come and give us completed manuscripts that we publish. You could understand us, maybe if I could think of your design. It's very collaborative. So our work with some of the artists is we meet, we talk about concepts, we talk about how to take the ideas forward, what stories can they have, what concepts are there. So it's very much, any of these books that you see in front of you are very much a result of a dialogue and close association, sometimes over periods of months or years. So just to put a thing on that. So I met Bhajju during this period, and what was interesting, I mean, we took to each other because I think somehow we share a sense of humor and a sense of, looking at the world. And when he was in Chennai, we asked him, what can we show you? You've come from Patanga, you're in Bhopal, can we show you anything in a city? Which cities have you been to? And he said, London. I said, London? How did you get to London? So then he told us this entire story of how he'd been invited to paint murals on the walls of a restaurant in Islington, Masala Zone. So we got to chatting, and it wasn't like the book evolved immediately. We were just chatting over lunch, and he had the most amazing way of very lightly recounting some very profound things. And those of you who've read the Jungle Book know that. So we realized there's an amazing travelogue here. And we've been also chatting about, for those of you in the know, Verrier Elvin, the anthropologist who was here. And Bhajju said, well, I'm interested in this idea because Elvin wrote about my tribe. Now I'd like to write about his. So, we realized that in the making, this is reverse anthropology. This is, it's one of my favorite books. It's a very important book. And where do you ever get the chance of someone from Bhajju's background actually commenting wittily on another culture? And turns out that Bhajju was, the easiest traveler. I mean, he took everything in his stride. So we used to talk about, so how did you like the people, what did you do, and so on. So the various sections of this book are really those things put together. And okay, now here's the most important thing as far as art is concerned. When we started, so telling is one thing, and he is a great storyteller. He has a great timing. He's got a really funny way of putting things. But how do you turn these things into images? So straight out, Bhajju said, I'm not realistic. Don't expect from me something like proportions, distance, light and shade. That's not what I do. So how are we going to talk about, individual experience? See, when you look at Gond art, you have, it's a community form in the sense that many of the stories, many of the symbols are understood by a group of people. So if there is a snake, for instance, people will know the earth is meant. So these are things that you know. Now, how are we to create images which speak not of community experience but individual experience? So it's a great breakthrough, as you can see, in how the art progressed. So We had very long discussions on how to do this without getting out of the grammar of his form. That's very important. I mean, there is no perspective. So, for some of you, please go and see the exhibition. For some of you, with the underground, we actually work with underground maps. Because they kind of are symbolic rather than literal or figurative. And having, from that, we arrived at what does the underground mean in Gond culture. And then Bhajju, of course, came up with this brilliant Quechua, who was king of the underworld. And it was a long process, a long and very, very enjoyable process. And I'm very amused to say that some of the things we were not happy with and discarded actually have been framed and put up. So I was just joking to Bhajju that, like Picasso, perhaps all his rejects are going to be sold as well. Things that, but you can see the process, and that's very important. Like, how did, the map, how did it become something organic? And therein also lies Bhajju's genius, because he was able to, through these discussions and talks, he was able to kind of come up with something. We'd look at it and say, it's not working. We'd go back. And so this was the process. And there it is. And for a long time, so this was released in the Museum of London back in the day. And very proud to say that John Berger was there to actually inaugurate the thing, which meant a lot to us. And also I had to explain to Bhajju what he meant for some of us who have been in the art field, the greatness of the man. And the rest is history. I've also I'd like to pass it on. I don't want to hold the mic for too long, but I'd like to pass on the mic. But I have here with me later for you to see other books of Bhajju that we have apart from the Jungle Book, and also some of our other Gond artists. So with that, I think I'll pass it on.
Let me, if I may, because part of what I would have been sharing, time permitting, would have addressed not just Kipling, but as I mentioned, Disney as well. And we have essentially 2 centuries worth of cultural imperialism, one from Britain and one from America. And the American style comes mostly through animation. And most people, you say to them nowadays, Jungle Book, they're thinking of the Disney version. There are many others, and I was going through a quick analysis of them all, but you're spared of all that. I'm sure perhaps many of you have overdosed on Hollywood-generated and Britain-generated versions of it. But I think it's important to contextualize, for me at least, why Bhajju's work is such a breath of fresh air and so wonderful, because it comes not in a vacuum. It comes with a long, over a century's worth of interpretations and reinterpretations. And I did a tally of what an industry this has become. We're talking about clearly well over $1 billion of Jungle Book related nonsense, a lot of it. And I say nonsense, some of it is ingenious and beautifully rendered. Kipling himself, as was his father, John Lockwood Kipling, they were both artists. And Disney, in his own way, has been a pioneer. One of the juicy tidbits that I would share is that the voice of the original Disney character of Mowgli was Bruce Reitherman, and he's become a grown-up. He's a year older than I am. Actually, I was in this whole world and culture of Disney. I was raised on this material in Southern California, and frankly, the Disneys were neighbors of my family in our very neighborhood. So I speak with some ambivalence on all this, because there's a lot of talent that has gone into these productions. Bruce Reitherman, the young voice, went on to produce wonderful nature documentaries. And this is something else that Disney was on the cutting edge of. Before Disney, nobody thought anyone would sit through a whole feature film on nature. So I feel very conflicted as an American, very critical. There's nothing like an apostate. The Disney approach is something that, unfortunately, it drums out everything else. And this is why when I saw Tara Douglas's films, which are interpretations of working with tribal artists in various parts of India, representing their genuine stories. Kipling never came to central India. I think many of you may know that. I would have shared with you some of the strange, patchy background of how he had at different times thinking his thoughts were to place Jungle Book in Uttar Pradesh, in the Dehradun area, other times in what they called Rajputana at the time. But he finally decided on Seoni Hills. Had he come here, he would have seen a treasury of visual arts and especially of oral literature, the folk stories, the myths that are recounted by Gauns and other peoples here. And this is what Tara has been researching and putting together in a way that engages young people so that they get something different than the Disney version. And this is something that the London Jungle Book has done very vividly. And without further ado, I'd like to maybe hear from Tara about what it's like to work with these tribal communities to develop such wonderful productions, and maybe what it's like to be confronting the hegemony of the Disney productions.
Hello, thank you. Well, for me, it started out that I just liked folk stories and these folk art forms, and it was my animation teacher, because my background is in animation. It was my animation teacher, Leslie Mackenzie in Scotland, who initiated the first project that I was involved in with these artists. And this is the tallest story competition, animation films. It's a collection of 5 short films, Adivasi stories, of which one of them is the Gond story. And this is what actually introduced me to these Gond artists. What we did is we did a bit of research in libraries and on the internet, and we found out about this Gond artistic community. And then we did a field research trip and met the artists. And since then it's become such an adventure and a journey for me that I'm still at it. And we've actually moved on now and made a second series, because this series, which includes one Gond story, you know, we really didn't know much. It was like our introduction to these artists and their stories. And we did this workshop. It was just a few days, and I think 18 of these artists participated in Bhopal. That workshop was held at the youth hostel, and they came every day. I think it was for about 10 days, and they colored in the characters, and they made the characters for the animation film, the Gond story, the best of the best. And then all that material was taken away to Scotland, where some animators scanned the artwork and animated it using some softwares. Then it came up that, if you're going to take this story from the community, then you also have to return it to the community. So then we thought, well, it was actually Leslie that said, then we have to put it into the local languages because they won't understand English. So then it was my job, because I was based in India, to go and get this translated, this program, which is a half-an-hour program of short stories, translated into local languages, into the languages of the 5 different communities, including Gondi. But then afterwards we found out that actually the artistic community are not very familiar with Gondi at all, but it is translated into Gondi. And then having gone through all that process and recording the voices and finding the speakers to speak the voices and recording it in, this is now in 8 languages? 7 languages. The 5 local languages and Hindi and English and Gaelic, 8 languages. Then, we had to also bring it back to the community, having gone to that effort. So then I had this tour in central India and screened it, and also I managed to screen the films in some academic institutions where questions came up about what we were doing, you know, and was it ethically correct to do this, and how much involvement did the artists actually have in this project, which then led me to go on to this next project, which is made completely in India. Tales of the Tribes was completed last year. It took 7 years to do, and it again includes one Gond story, because by this point I had friends. The Gond artists were my friends, and they were contacting me and they were saying, can we do another story? And everyone liked their story very much because of the art form was so attractive. So then I thought, well, why not include another? Because this was a storytelling competition, and the Gond story actually got the most votes out of the 5. So then we thought, why not have another Gond story, and this time try to involve more the artists and do it a bit more in depth. So that involved basically doing workshops to choose the story at the National Institute of Design, because animation is a very technical process, you know, and it's something that takes years to learn how to handle this technology, especially now it's so much computer-driven, digital-driven. So anyway, we had involved these young artists, young animators, animation students at the National Institute of Design. And we had the workshop there, and we invited some of these Gond artists who are here today, like Venkat, to join us there, and we did the workshop. And then the whole project came to a standstill because we didn't have any support to fund the production, because animation takes many months to do. So then a year or two passed, and again, finally we had to resuscitate the project, and we had some support and did a second workshop in 2015. So that was about 3 years later. At the Indira Gandhi Rastriya Manav Sangrahalaya. Luckily, we got some support from them. And again, assembled a group of artists and a couple of young animators from National Institute of Design, different people, and resuscitated the project. And then finally, these young animators finished it off. And then again, we had this thing to put it into the local languages. And then again, having done that, because in this collection, there's the one Gond story, and the other 4 of them are from the Northeast, because my research had taken me to the Northeast and found out all these tribal stories and communities there. So then we have the Northeast stories in this collection, and they had to all be dubbed into the local languages. And then I did this tour last summer to screen it back to the kids. Did as much as I could in 2 months, but obviously just scraped the surface. And, you know, basically the end thing is that the result is, the response I got is that everyone is really quite interested and excited by this kind of work, especially the younger generation, you know, because they're all fascinated with animation and their mobile phones and digital technology. The young Gond the children of the Gond artists and all the other indigenous communities. So it was a way for them to suddenly take some interest in their stories, which otherwise they might have been losing interest in, to get involved. And I just want to do a lot more of this because I'm a bit deeply involved now. And we started off with this Adivasi Arts Trust, which is English UK registered charity, which has now been going for 10 years. But now, last year, we have just registered a new Indian trust, the Trust for Tribal Art, Culture and Knowledge, with Indian trustees. I'm the only overseas citizen of India. And so now we want to try and do it more here and with more involvement and more engagement with the local artists and storytellers. I've got lots to say, but I don't want to go on. Yeah?
I know there'll be give and take on some of this because what is being shared is of great interest not only to us but presumably to many of you too, and there'll be questions. But if I can just maybe proceed with the burning question that I have for Anubhav Nath. We've heard here from a leading publisher of children's books and also animation films that are targeted for children. And this is really reaching to young people is very important. My own background is in the field of education, and that's really whether you're talking about environment or values of any sort, and how to make people sensitive to cultures that are not the dominant ones. It's very important and it's challenging. There's an aesthetic of tribal arts that sometimes, and one of the risks and concerns I have is whether if it's often most popularized through animation targeted to children and through children's literature. And again, I have the utmost respect for children's literature and have much to share on Kipling on this topic. It's a very serious genre. But in popular minds, if these artists are always associated in this charming way that can be very powerful, but then how do you make impact that these are also artists? I had the conclusion, some striking images of showing not just the wonderful books from illustrations from Tower Press, but also magnificent paintings that are serious works of art, fine art with a capital F. How does that somehow get through to new audiences, and what kind of, say, prejudices, and how do you deal with that with your audiences who come to OHA's gallery and to the Jaipur Literary Festival?
Thank you, John. So I would just need to give you a little bit about my background, just to put the story in perspective and you would know where I'm coming from. I started working in the arts about 10 years ago, and I started with a mainstream contemporary art gallery. Very soon I felt a little jaded with it, and I just felt, a lot of people were doing the same thing, and it was not really giving me the kind of creative satisfaction that it should have. I've been working with the Jaipur Literature Festival, where I am responsible for the visual arts on an annual basis. So with the festival, we launched the Ojas Art Award in 2015, which was for tribal and traditional arts. And the idea was that every year we will choose one genre and do a survey in it, and it would be application based. So the artists would send in applications, and through an independent jury, we would decide on who the winners are. And we have a master artist and a protege artist. So the first year, we thought we were going to start with Gond art, because Gond it's a very popular medium, and people instantly recognize Gond as a tribal art. So if you ask people, okay, which are the tribal arts of India, they may not know the name or they may not know the genre, but they would recognize Gond as a tribal art. So we decided to start with that. And we got very good support from the community. We got a number of applications, and all of those good things happened. And Bhajju was an awardee, and also Venkat was an awardee. Bhajju got the first prize. And in the protege category, it was Roshni Byaun. And so it was at that time that's when my journey started in this category, and I really felt that this art needs to be shown as fine art. It needs to be made precious. I really believe that as an art gallerist or curator, it's a part of my job to get something recognition and to make it precious. And alone I cannot do it. There's an entire ecosystem that's needed, and all of us are a part of that ecosystem. And it's only when all of us are contributing into that ecosystem that the whole cycle turns and that preciousness comes in. So when we were speaking, when Geeta said about Picasso, even the scribblings becoming important, so that's very nice for me to hear, because that is like that kind of complements into what I'm trying to do here. So John, I could go on and on about this, but I'll address the question you asked about the prejudices that are there. Yes, there is a lot of prejudice, and many a times people actually still look at the tribal arts more as craft and not as art. That's a very big question that goes on in the intellectual / anthropological circles, and where there's this constant debate: is this an art or is this a craft? For me, there are within Gond art, within the tribal and traditional arts, there are two distinct categories, and I think there is a space for both of them, where there is a craft side to it, where we see artists or craftsmen creating works like objects, which are utility based, like textiles or little containers and those kind of things. Those are utility based, and so I would qualify those as craft. But when you have an artist creating an artwork, which goes into galleries, which goes into museums, that is fine art. And there's a certain aesthetic to it which we must recognize and celebrate. I think it's important to celebrate the tribal arts for what they are and not try to contemporize them to fit into a forced language. We should not make a forced language. They should just be they should be where they are and let them evolve on their own and have their own trajectory and journey, which we as supporters or as people on the outside can then support and adapt and take further. And the other thing. So we had Bhajju's first solo show in India in 2016. It was it was at the demonetization time. So so we had his first solo show, which was very successful. And to me, the success of an art exhibition or an art project is not just about sales. It's a holistic success. It's all about the people who came in, the people who visited, the journalists who came in, the people who collected the works, the institutions that were interested and wanted more information. All of that together helps us create an ecosystem. And that's how it's happened for all the other arts in everywhere, even the Indian mainstream contemporary arts. It was in 2000s when suddenly, not suddenly, but like with over 2-3 decades of work that suddenly, one felt it was sudden, but it was not sudden. When this ecosystem came in the forefront, when you realized that there were auction houses, there were writers, and there were all these 7-8 different people, categories of people who were looking at Indian contemporary art, and it became very precious. So similarly, I think the same has to be there for the tribal arts, for Gond art, for heel art, for all the indigenous art forms. And that is how it will happen, and it's already happening, because one does see auction houses taking interest, one does see writers taking interest, curators, critics, collectors, museums, institutions, and gallerists. Mainstream galleries are now looking at doing at least a lot more with these art forms. And for us, right at the time of Bhajju's Padma Shri announcement, there was another little success to celebrate when Bhajju got a solo show with Bonhams in Hong Kong. Bonhams being a very prominent auction house based in London. And so from time to time, they invite artists to do solo shows with them. So that was important, because to me that meant that Bonhams is probably looking at a bigger holistic picture where they're trying to probably test out the Indian tribal arts and how it would work for them in their programming / further work. So,
I just want to say that we don't see ourselves primarily only as children's publishers. And some of these books, the London Jungle Book is not just for children. I think it's really for all ages. So I see us as publishers of illustrated books. Some of them, even you have a piece of work or you have a folk tale. Children will absorb something from it. Adults will get something else from it. I think especially with oral tales, there is a thing where it's really all ages, and how you receive the work is, what age you are. So some of these books really present the art in a way that it is for all ages, and other books are perhaps more educational. So just wanted to clarify that whole thing of aesthetics. Books are also a way not only of documenting art, not just coffee table, but books can be a way where the artist is the author. And so you get a perspective, you get a sense of story, you get a sense of... So an artist or a designer can also author a book, and it need not just be a children's book. I just wanted to add that.
Because exactly this thing about the, that animation is usually targeted at children, especially in India, and especially with this sort of Disney kind of mold is for children, and this is, like this, when it translates, when it's the Gond art done by the artist that is being used to tell this story, the Gone story, the art form is so complex that it's not really the children's kind of genre. And this is one of the things which I come up with as a filmmaker, as an animation filmmaker, trying to adapt and interpret these stories for the animation medium. You know, this sort of negotiation of like the audience expectations, the stakeholders' expectations, you know, who's going to watch this film, how is it going, the commercial interests of it and all that, you know. So that's why, you know, I'm interested in doing this kind of work more as a research type of thing, where, you know, it's using animation as a way to understand these and look into these stories, research these stories, and also equally about the, you know, the media people, such as myself or the students that work on these projects, that it should be a platform for us to be able to work together with the traditional artists. So I think using their art form, I mean, incorporating their art forms in the animation perhaps takes it a bit away from the children thing. But then the question is always, well, who is it targeted to and what kind of compromises you have to make? And this is all part of the research process, is exploring these questions.
Thank you. Points well taken indeed. और सोच रहा हूँ कि हमको ज़रूर बज्जू से कुछ सुनना चाहिए.
पहले तो सब लोगों को मेरा नमस्कार. मेरे बुक और मेरे चित्रों के बारे में आप लोगों ने यहाँ सुनने के लिए बैठे और आप लोगों ने बताया मेरी जर्नी के बारे में, उसके लिए भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. साहित्य महोत्सव का समाज के स्वरूप को चित्रित करने में जो योगदान है वह आप सबके समक्ष उपस्थित होकर सार्थक लग रहा है. मैंने अपने चित्रों को गीतों के समान माना है और इन गीतों को बनाने के लिए प्रसिद्ध गुण प्रधान कवियों की परंपरा, जिसे हम लोग बाना गाथा गाना कहते हैं, बाना गाथा गायन परंपरा कहते हैं, का अनुसरण करते हुए चित्रकला को जीवित करने के लिए कोशिश करता हूँ. जो काम मैंने बचपन में अपनी माँ के साथ घर को सजाने में मदद के रूप में किया करता था, वह आज सबके सामने मेरी पहचान है. और यह पहचान को सबसे पहले मेरे आदरणीय गुरु स्वर्गीय श्री जनगढ़ सिंह श्याम जी ने समझा. जब मैं जीविका के लिए गांव से भोपाल आया, सा अक्षर का मेरे जीवन में विशेष महत्व है. हमारे आदिवासी लोक साहित्य के माध्यम से ही मैंने अपने चित्रों को आप सबके समक्ष जीवित करने का प्रयास किया है. इन चित्रों में मैंने अपने अंतरंग के विभिन्न भावों को कई रंगों के माध्यम से आप सब तक पहुंचाने का प्रयास किया है, जो कि निरंतर जारी है. नवीन विषयों विचारों के साथ प्रयोग करते हुए मैं इसको अपनी लोक कलाओं में इसको देखने का प्रयास करता हूँ. मेरी कला में नवीन कला का प्रभाव देखा जा सकता है, किंतु मेरी कला की अंतरात्मा अभी भी वही बचपन वाली है जो माँ के साथ थी. मुझे कभी भी इस प्रकार की सकारात्मक प्रतिक्रिया की उम्मीद नहीं थी. मुझे लगा था कि लोगों को विश्व को देखने का मेरा नज़रिया शायद विचित्र लगेगा. आदिवासी समाज बाकी सब समाजों में अनंत अनभिज्ञ है, जो कि मानव समाज की मूल जड़ें हैं. यह समाज आज भी खुद को बदलते परिवेश में अपने लोक कलाओं जैसे डिगना, बाना, सुआ, ददरिया, रीना आदि के माध्यम से जीवित रखे हुए हैं. बाना और डिगना आदि ने मुझे भज्जू से भज्जू श्याम बनाया है, जिसके लिए मैं इसका सदैव कृतज्ञ रहूँगा. इसकी पहचान बनाए रखने के लिए और बचाए रखने के लिए अंत तक प्रयास करूँगा, और मैं आशा करता हूँ इसके लिए आप मेरा साथ अवश्य देंगे, जैसा कि अभी देते आए हैं. बचपन में जब भी मैं अपने गांव में कोई भी कार्य करता था, जैसे जंगल में लकड़ी लाना, खेती करना, नदी में बंसी खेलने के लिए जाना हो, साथ ही साथ होते थे. जो मन में सदा के लिए बस गया। यह मेरी जो जीवन यात्रा है उसमें मेरे साथियों ने कई बदलाव लाए हैं। आज भी जब मैं शहरी परिवेश मुझ पर हावी होने लगते हैं या मेरे कारों में हावी होने लगते हैं तो मैं वही पुराने संगी साथियों के पास चला जाता हूँ जहाँ से मैं अपने काम के लिए अलग सोच सकूँ, जो कि किताब के रूप में आप सबके साथ आती है। इस तरह से हमारा लोक साहित्य समाज और साथियों ने मुझे आप सब में जीवित रखा हुआ है। मैं इस इवेंट के लिए अपने साथियों जैसे सर्वश्री जानबोस जी, गीता ओल, अनुभवनाथ, उद्यन वाजपेयी, अनूप रंजन पांडे का आभार प्रकट करता हूँ। विशेष रूप से आदरणीय मीरा दास जी का, जिन्होंने मुझे आज भारत भवन में मंच प्रदान किया है जहाँ पर मेरा कोई कार्य नहीं है। शायद अब मैं अपना आशा करता हूँ कि अब मेरे और भारत भवन के बीच में सेतु बन जाए, जिसके लिए मेरा नाम भी यहाँ भारत भवन में अंकित हो जाए। धन्यवाद।
Thank you for watching the session from BLF 2019. Kindly subscribe to our channel for more such videos.